What if the Blair Witch was more than a movie? What if there are entities that lurk in the woods? People with terrible motives trying to summon otherworldly powers? Well, these are 5 allegedly true scary stories of real encounters with witches. Halloween is on the way, and the witches have something brewing. If you want your story to appear on this channel, send it over at darknessprevails.org. I'm looking for stories from night clerks and sightings of the Thunderbird. The Witch of Pine Forest by Garth K. There's an old legend my family has passed down for years, one that you won't hear commonly down in Pine Forest, Texas. It's not one of those urban legends that the townsfolk and kids tell and repeat until it becomes something nonsensical. Rather, it's something that, if you were to ask nearly any of the residents of Pine Forest about, they'd raise their eyebrow at you and wonder what you've been inhaling. This is the legend of the Witch of Pine Forest, and it is preceded by my very own encounter with what I thought was just a story to scare me as a child. It was told to me by my grandmother Bonnie. She had children late in life, so by the time I was old enough to remember her, she was sadly struggling with intense cancer. Only 2 years after I remember being told this story, Grandma Bonnie passed away after losing the battle. God rest her soul. It was an evening that I spent the night with her and Grandpa. My parents dropped me off, needing a night alone. We stayed up playing Yahtzee, Scrabble, and watching Looney Tunes on the small TV they had on the kitchen countertop. The moment I started yawning, though, Grandma knew it was my bedtime. She had Grandpa carry me to bed, and as I was being tucked in, Grandma was saying her goodnights. I remember clearly what happened next. The sound of a branch hitting the window in the guest room that I was staying in. I jumped, nearly crying at the sound. My grandma settled me down and said there was nothing to worry about. But there was a look on her face. Was it remembrance? I don't know. But it was odd to me, even at that age. You know, she started in a way that sounded like she just remembered something important that she had to tell me. I've never told you about the Witch of Pine Forest. I was immediately creeped out, and it was obvious enough to my grandma that she then tried to comfort me. It's just a story, child. Don't worry. It's a good story, though. A story a child like you needs to hear. Teach you a lesson, a moral. You like that kind of story, right? Like the tortoise and the hare. I nodded quietly. It's like that, so nothing to be scared of. My eyes widened, and I pulled the blanket tightly over myself. I thought I was ready. I was not. She began. A long time ago, there was an old lady who loved children. She was known around these parts for giving kids homemade candy, licorice, caramels, things like that. She made it herself just to give away to the children. Some of the parents began to grow suspicious of her. At the time, children disappearing was common. People disappearing was common. Wild animals got hungry in the winter months. The natives often did what they could despite the locals, and without many laws or people to police those laws, trust in your fellow neighbor wasn't likely. When a certain boy never came home one evening, the town was quick to blame the old lady. Even when they found the boy, lost in the woods and injured from coyotes, they took out their fears on the old lady. They burned down her home, and with nothing more than a bag of what was left of her homemade candy, she was banished into the wilderness. At her age, she was sure not to survive. Ever since that day, some have said to have seen an old decrepit silhouette in the woods, standing and watching. Many children have reported over the years that a strange-looking old woman tried to call them into the woods, offering them treats from her bag of candy. So what I have to say is this, hon. When you hear or see something strange in the woods of Pine Forest, ignore it, and it will go away. And never, ever take candy from a strange old woman standing near the trees. Needless to say, I was as horrified as I was confused. I was looking at this story as just that, a story. But I couldn't stop wondering why she acted like it wasn't a story. Why she was making it sound so real, so creepy. She sighed, kissed my forehead, and went off to bed with Grandpa. She left me in that room, with only the light from the cracked door shining on my chest. I watched the window that night, watching the tree branch outside sway in the moderate winds. It wasn't until 5 years afterward that this story came to life for me in a way that I wish wasn't true. Grandma was gone, and Grandpa, still able to walk but just barely, was lonely. So I'd often visit him over the weekends to keep him company. We'd watch TV near the fireplace, talk about tales from his youth, and reminisce about Grandma. One night he asked me to fetch some logs for the fire. He hired some guys every so often to chop some up and stack them outside by the house. As such, all I had to do was go outside, grab a few logs, and get back inside where it was warm, as it was an especially cold Texas winter. I put on my coat and went out the door. I circled the house and made my way quickly to the stack of logs outside. To my right, maybe 15 yards from me, was the tree line that encompassed the perimeter of Grandpa's home. I continued my task. 1 log, 2 logs, 3 logs. Maybe I could fit a 4th in my arms, I wondered. As I struggled to grab a 4th log, I heard something. A sound that broke the quiet of the night. "Hello, youngin'." It was an ancient voice coming from somewhere close. The voice nearly reminded me of my grandma's, but that was most likely my memory being hazy. I turned in the direction of the sound and saw a dark shape standing amidst the trees. The voice continued, "Out fetching wood to keep warm." "Well, yeah. Are you lost?" I asked. "There's not another house around here for a while. Would you like to come inside?" "No," she chuckled. "But I might have something to help you keep warm. Do you like candy?" My heart stopped. My clearest and most vivid memory of my grandma came back to me. The witch of Pine Forest, the old lady who gave out candy. "Caramels, drops, butterscotch. Tell me, boy, what's your favorite? Come over here." She waved her hand in her direction to beckon me over. "And you can choose what you like." I was steadily making my way to the corner of the house. Once there, I could make a quick sprint for the front door. Without either of us uttering another word, I was able to round that corner, cutting off my view of the dark shadow in the woods. I made my way to the front door, but I nervously dropped one of the logs on the front steps. As I quickly bent down to pick it up, I looked toward the corner of the house where I'd just come from. I jumped back, dropping the remainder of the logs. The silhouette of the old lady was now at the corner of the house where I'd been seconds ago. She was still somehow covered in enough darkness that I could not make out many details.
Oh dear, why would you ignore me like that? I just want to give you a treat.
What now horrified me and kept me unable to speak at all was how tall her silhouette was. From that distance, I could make out her height. She stood to the height of the bottom of the roof of the house, tall enough to latch up and crawl onto the roof with ease if she so desired. I freaked out, clawing at the doorknob as my numb hands slid off once, twice, 3 times before I finally had the door opened and I was falling onto the floor. My grandpa, having been standing by the window watching everything, quickly shut the door behind me and locked it. He shushed me with a finger to his mouth and beckoned me to follow him to the kitchen, where we sat in bright light and silence for about an hour. Eventually, Grandpa spoke.
It's good of you to listen to your grandma, boy. Never forget what she told you.
I couldn't reply. Maybe I was in shock, maybe I was just that dumbfounded. All I could do was sit there until my grandpa felt safe enough to go to bed, and I went to the guest room, drew the curtains closed, and watched old VHS movies on the old TV there. Some stories are more than stories. Some stories are warnings. If I hadn't been told that story by my grandma, I would not have recognized the Witch of Pine Forest. And I may not be here now to share this warning with you. Witch's Ghost by the Raptor. This is the story of what happened to me one night on a little country farm road at the foothills of the North Georgia mountains, Dahlonega to be more specific. I met up with 2 of my best friends one night because we decided that we were going to explore and do a bit of ghost hunting at a cemetery that was at a nearby church. There are some pretty old graves in this older section of the cemetery there, and there is a legend or rumor that a witch is buried there. So the place truly does have an eerie feel to it. I've been to several cemeteries that are actually quite peaceful feeling, but this cemetery, especially with the witch supposedly in it, is not one of them. If you know the area, you probably know the place I'm talking about. My friends and I were in our early 20s at the time. We'll call my friends Mark and John for the story. Mark, John, and I met up at one of John's relatives' houses, which was only about a mile from the cemetery. We all rode to the cemetery in Mark's car. I believe the time of year was fall, and it wasn't raining or foggy that night, just an average night. We made it to the cemetery and drove down to the older section of graves, which is separated by a stretch of grass and a fairly long, narrow paved road. The old cemetery is actually kind of like an island or mound of dirt, with the road circling around it and a section of woods around the back on 2 sides. There are old concrete steps that lead up into the cemetery on the front side, and a concrete wall lining the front of the large mound of earth. I honestly don't remember if this was my first time walking around the place, or maybe my second. Either way, when you begin walking up that first concrete step, you immediately feel different. Like you're no longer alone, like the very air surrounding you has become thick, not with humidity, but with a presence. Like you stepped back in time, but into the most troubled place. Mark, John, and myself were no professionals, of course. We were just a few guys with some free time, some camera phones, and the desire to capture any paranormal evidence we could on video or pictures, but mostly just having a good time. We had our fun, took pictures and videos, maybe stayed 45 minutes to an hour and a half. While it was a creepy place, we didn't encounter anything that night at the cemetery. But of course, I wouldn't be typing this right now if the night was paranormally uneventful for me. We got back in Mark's car and headed back to the house where our cars were. We stood in the driveway talking for a while, discussing the night and looking at some of the pictures. Finally, when it was ready to leave and I said my goodbyes, John said, "Hey, if you're going home, just take the back road near the house, and it'll get you back to the road quicker." Thinking nothing of it and ready to go home, I piled into my '88 Lincoln Town Car and headed down the road. The road was in a partially wooded area at first, and shortly after it opened up, and it was just farm fields and a couple of barns on either side, with some houses in the distance. The road was pretty straight at this point. It took no turns, but this is where my night was about to take an interesting and terrifying turn. Remember, it wasn't raining, and I didn't see any fog that night. There I was, cruising along in my smooth ride, going maybe 30 or 40 on the backcountry farm road that night, and it happened. Something I always had reason to believe but wanted to see for myself. Maybe 100 feet in front of the car, in the middle of the road, there was something. It was like fog, but I know it wasn't, because this supposed fog was in the shape of a person. Little patches of fog are horizontal, not vertical, but this ghost or spirit or fog, it didn't have any discerning sharp details that I could make out. Just a foggy shape of a person, standing in the 5 to 6 foot range. Hard to say, because it happened so quickly, and scared the crap out of me. I saw it in my path, and my mouth would have been in my lap if that were possible. I was just driving, frozen, hands on the wheel. It dispersed as it hit my windshield. It couldn't have been more than 2 or 3 seconds later when my headlights began to shut off. My arm hairs were immediately standing at attention, and my headlights had gone off for a few seconds, but those seconds felt like forever. The lights went on, flickered, then turned off, like the power was being sapped from them. I couldn't believe what was happening. The car had an automatic headlight dimmer switch, and I later had to replace the part because in the next week or two, randomly when I was driving at night, the headlights would once again shut off then come back on. As I got to the end of that road, I pulled over onto the shoulder, kinda regrouped in my mind, and called my friends and told them what happened. They believed me and seemed amazed. Perhaps what I encountered that night was the spirit of the witch, angry that we had messed around at her burial site. I'd always wanted some kind of evidence of ghosts or something like it, and for me it finally happened with an experience. So just remember, when you go looking for ghosts, you may just find what you're looking for. Modern Witch Hunt by Marie R. I was 15 when I had a haunting experience in Salem, Massachusetts. I was doing an investigation with the Paranormal Salem team, and right when I arrived, I felt a very bad feeling. We started in this little area where there were little stones that marked people who had passed during the Salem witch trials. For a minute, it was a little hard to breathe, but that's nothing compared to what else I felt that night. We went by the infamous witch house, which is where Bridget Bishop was the first to reside. Legend had it that she bewitched people in their dreams. We were only a few feet from the building when the sensation of dread came back, taking my breath away. There was such an evil feeling to it, as if someone was standing behind me. When I turned around, nothing was there. As I was walking through the nearby parking lot, I got a huge spike on the meter, which was probably in the 60s range. At the same time, it was getting extremely cold, to the point that I could see my breath in the air, which was bizarre because all day before this, it had been extremely hot compared to the usual weather. I felt as if an energy had passed through me, It was a sort of you just want to wet yourself kind of feeling. It was so creepy. Not to mention the sensation of something playing with my hair, something like a cold hand. I can't even watch Ghost Adventures anymore without remembering these sensations. Home Intruder by Miriam. It was a long time ago. I must have been 6 years old. Growing up, my mom used to tell me stories. One that I remember prominently was that if I didn't sleep, a witch would come to scare me. She gave it a backstory and everything. It was very late one night. If I could guess, it was roughly 1 a.m. I used to sleep with my parents when I was little, so both of them were asleep at the time. I woke up to a cold gust of wind coming from the window. I opened my eyes. It was a full moon, so I was able to see quite a bit. That's when I saw something in front of me, a tall, dark figure moving very slowly. Now, I don't remember vividly what it looked like, but I do remember the figure had a very bad posture, walking with a badly hunched back, and an unnatural-looking head larger than a normal person's. But it was very light on its feet, making no noise at all as it moved through my room. 6-year-old me was thinking it was a witch, so I pretended to sleep while at the same time trying to wake up my parents, which I unfortunately failed to do so. The creepy thing is, nothing was stolen or taken, and no one was harmed. I told my mom this story not long ago, and she honestly looked terrified, knowing that someone or something was in her house, all while they were sleeping. The Witch on My Street by Graham. When I was in grade school, I was always told to stay away from the house at the end of our street. This was an order I didn't dare go against, because a creepy old woman lived there. She always stared at the people who walked by, as if cursing us for existing. The woman had an extreme dislike for kids as well, and at one point, she called me over to her porch. I thought she needed help, so I hesitantly walked over. Though once I was there, she spat on me, said something in a language I didn't understand, then tried to scratch me with her massive fingernails. But by then, I was running off of her porch. Now, I've seen some weird things going on at her place. Missing pets were often blamed on her, some of which I last saw in her yard. The most horrifying thing, though, something that I can't explain, it's what happened to my friend Benjamin. Benjamin liked to tease the old woman and would take time out of his day to play just in front of her gate on the sidewalk. Here's the weird part, something I doubt anyone here would believe. There was a day she was especially angry at Benjamin, as he had accidentally kicked his ball in her yard. He jumped over the fence, grabbed it, and quickly ran out in seconds' time. But it was plenty of time for the old woman to see him and spit those curses at him as she chased him out of her yard. Little did I know that that was the last I'd ever see of Benjamin. After not seeing him for a straight week, which was already impossible and bizarre, I asked my parents if he had moved or something, without me seeing or knowing about it. My parents were confused. They acted like they had no idea who Benjamin was, apparently forgetting somehow the sleepovers we had had. I decided to walk over to his house. I knocked on the door, and the people I thought were his parents acted the same way when I brought it up. They acted like they never had a son. I stayed far away from the house at the end of the street after that, and I remember praying for the longest time that my family would decide to move. You see, I didn't want me or my family to be the next ones to disappear. I don't know if the woman at the end of the street is still around these days, but if I were you, I would leave any creepy old ladies living alone to themselves. For anyone that considers themselves witches out there, keep in mind that what we've been talking about tonight are the bad kinds of witches. Those that wish to harm other people. The kind that want to take out vengeance in one way or another. Who think that having been wronged by others is their excuse to haunt other people for millennia. Well, I guess you could say, if you do know a witch, be extra careful. Gift them tons of Jolly Ranchers. Do what it takes to not become a target. Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Don't forget, you can send me your scary stories at darknessprevails.org. I'm looking for experiences from night clerks and sightings of the Thunderbird. If you want to support my channel further, go to patreon.com/darknessprevails. If you donate any amount, I will put your name in the credits at the end of my videos, for as long as you donate, of course. And you'll be able to download all future episodes as ad-free MP3s. Or if you're in need of some clothes, click shop below or go to teespring.com/darkprevails to get some of my creepy cool merchandise just in time for Halloween. Thank you. Now, here are my 5 favorite early comments from the previous video. About 5 times people's childhoods were ruined. Joey vs. Horror says, "It's spooky time." I'll write that down as my backup slogan. Justin DeSavage says, "I love it and haven't even watched it." That's true love right there, baby. Thank you. Ed the Strange says, "Nothing can ruin my childhood, except school. That place was a prison." Could you imagine how much better the world would be if we had children excited about school? I don't know, that might be impossible. What kids like and enjoy is completely different from what the government thinks we should have. I mean, we do need smart kids after all. Arabella Patterson says, "When life gives you lemons, you make lemonade vampires and suck the juice out of them." You had me at suck the juice. But wouldn't a lemonade vampire be the one doing the sucking? I'm not an expert at sucking myself, that's why I'm asking. Slyn N107 Sanchez says, "Can you make a video about black-eyed children?" Eventually, I've got a few stories on the subject, but I do need a few more. Also, black-eyed children, huh? Who keeps punching these poor kids? Anyways guys, thanks so much for tuning in to another Darkness Prevails video. More scary stories are coming soon, so stay tuned. Until next time, here are the credits to my patrons who continue to donate to my channel, making everything even more possible. Remember, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.